Imagine crawling through a coolant-soaked conduit when an elegant alien woman appears and names you by scent. "You smell like rust and star anise," she says, a phrase that unlocks a war memory you'd forgotten. She remembers you saving her life years ago, trapped under debris while fire screamed around you. Now she's tracked you across space because scent binds memory in her culture, and she needs your help to prevent another catastrophe. So scent isn't just a sensory detail for the Ciliari. It's their filing system. Humans prioritize visual memory because our brains evolved that way. We trust what we see over what we smell. But imagine if every significant moment in your life came tagged with a specific scent signature that triggered perfect recall. That's their normal. For the Ciliari, scent molecules capture moments with laboratory precision. Unlike human memory that degrades and rewrites itself over time, their olfactory system preserves events without the emotional distortion or fading details. Their brains process scent information through multiple redundant neural pathways, creating what amounts to biological backup files. The scent of rust and star anise wasn't just a random combination to lie. It was a time-stamped memory file that hadn't corrupted over years. There are Earth cultures that understood this principle too. Certain indigenous groups used specific scent blends in oral history ceremonies, where the aroma would trigger collective memory recall during storytelling. The difference is that for Ciliari, this isn't ceremonial, it's biological. Their nasal receptors number in the hundreds of millions, and their olfactory bulbs occupy nearly a third of their brain volume. What we consider a faint background smell is, to them, a detailed chemical readout of environment, emotion, and temporal context. This creates an interesting problem in cross-species interactions. Humans show up with photographs and documents as proof. Ciliari arrive with scent memories that they can play back with perfect clarity. One system depends on external verification, the other on internal biological certainty. Guess which one leaves less room for argument? That's why Lai tracked Gerald across sectors. His scent signature was logged in her memory as definitively as a fingerprint in a database. The combination of industrial rust from the wreckage and the star anise from the medical supplies he'd been carrying created a unique identifier she couldn't ignore. For her, this wasn't a hunch or a vague recollection. It was the equivalent of pulling up a verified file. So when she named his scent in that conduit, she wasn't making conversation. She was stating a verified fact from her people's most reliable record-keeping system. The sudden intimacy between them wasn't accidental. From her perspective, she'd just encountered a walking, breathing archive of shared history. She knew things about him that even he had forgotten, which creates a rather one-sided familiarity that humans find deeply unsettling. This scent-based verification system explains why she needed specifically him, not just any engineer. Her people don't trust documents that can be forged or memories that fade. They trust scent molecules that retain their chemical truth across decades. War does funny things to memory. The human brain tends to file away the worst moments under layers of protective haze, like packing dangerous tools in foam. Gerald had countless hours of combat salvage work that had blurred into one long smear of adrenaline and exhaustion. The particular day Lai remembered so clearly was just another Tuesday in hell for him. Rescue operations during active combat aren't like the clean extractions you see in entertainment feeds. Reality involves plasma fire cutting through bulkheads, the smell of ozone and burned wiring, structural members groaning under stress they were never meant to handle. You move through corridors filled with smoke so thick it feels like swimming, your helmet lights cutting uselessly through particulate-filled air. The sounds alone could break your concentration. Screaming metal, emergency alerts, and that awful silence right before another explosion hits. Human memory encoding under extreme stress works differently than normal recall. The amygdala goes into overdrive, prioritizing threat response over memory formation. You remember the feeling of terror far more clearly than the sequence of events. The brain captures fragments, the way a piece of shrapnel embedded itself in a control panel, the specific pattern of cracks in a viewport, the taste of blood in your mouth from biting your cheek during an impact. For the Ciliari, it's the opposite system. High stress creates hyper-detailed scent-based memories, a biological defense mechanism that ensures they never forget what nearly killed them. Where Gerald's brain was protecting him by blurring the trauma, Lai's was creating perfect records for future survival. Two species, same terrifying event, completely different memory outcomes. Imagine someone showing you photographic evidence of a heroic act you performed, but have no recollection of. Now imagine that evidence is their perfect biological memory of your actions, complete with sensory details you can't dispute. It creates a peculiar psychological disorientation. You're being praised for a version of yourself that exists only in someone else's mind. Gerald had to accept that his own memory had failed where an alien's had succeeded. The specific moment now coming back to him involved a collapsed support beam in a medical bay. Lai had been trapped under debris with plasma fires closing in. Gerald used a manual hydraulic jack from his repair kit to lift the wreckage just enough for her to crawl free. The star anise scent came from broken medical containers nearby, the rust from the torn metal he was lifting. His focus had been entirely on the mechanical problem. Calculate the weight, position the jack, apply pressure gradually. Just another rescue in a day full of them. But for Lai, this wasn't just another rescue. That moment represented the first time a human had risked themselves for a Ciliary during the conflict. While diplomats were still arguing over ceasefire terms, an engineer in a stained uniform was already building peace one life at a time. Her people remember such gestures with the same significance humans remember signed treaties. This shared memory suddenly matters because it proves cross-species cooperation existed even at the war's worst moments. That historical truth could rewrite the official narrative that currently threatens to derail peace talks. Sometimes the most important diplomatic evidence isn't in treaty archives. It's in the scent memories of those who were actually there. Gerald's world was one of schematics and spanners, not statecraft. His days followed the steady rhythm of maintenance cycles and diagnostic checks. He fixed coolant leaks, replaced burnt-out relays, calibrated sensor arrays. The work was methodical, predictable, and far removed from the polished corridors of interstellar diplomacy. He dealt with the mechanical guts of things, the systems that kept everyone else comfortable and unaware. Diplomats trade in words and implications. They read subtle shifts in tone, interpret formal gestures, negotiate clauses in treaties. An engineer reads pressure gauges and thermal signatures. One profession deals with the abstract architecture of peace. The other maintains the physical architecture that keeps everyone breathing. They might as well be from different species. But here's the thing about a good engineer. They understand systems, not just how they're supposed to work, but how they fail. They develop a sixth sense for the tiny anomalies, the faint hum that's a half octave too high, the vibration that shouldn't be there. A diplomat might notice a negotiator's nervous tells. An engineer notices the ventilation system cycling 3 seconds too fast. This practical mindset translates surprisingly well to a crisis. Where a diplomat sees a broken agreement, an engineer sees a broken system. They don't get bogged down in why it failed philosophically. They just start looking for the faulty component. This is a remarkably useful skill set when the crisis involves actual, physical sabotage instead of just hurt feelings. Hands-on problem solvers like Jarrell approach situations differently. They're not impressed by rank or title, only by function. A malfunctioning valve demands the same respect whether it's on a freighter or a flagship. This lack of reverence for hierarchy lets them see past the official story to the underlying mechanics. They're the ones who ask the simple, obvious questions that everyone else overlooks because they're too busy with protocol. In high-stakes negotiations, this practical thinking becomes a secret weapon. While ambassadors debate the wording of a clause, an engineer is mentally tracing the wiring behind the walls, wondering why the environmental controls are drawing more power than the schematics indicate. They spot the physical evidence of deception that the political minds might miss. Gerald's specific value lay in his ability to think like a machine. He knew the turn of skies systems intimately, not from studying manuals but from repairing them. He understood the ship's quirks and shortcuts, the places where a saboteur could hide their work. A diplomat might suspect a lie. An engineer could find the spliced cable or the reprogrammed circuit that proved it. This made him the ideal detective for this particular crisis. The threat wasn't abstract, it was physical, wired into the ship's very infrastructure. You needed someone who spoke the language of hydraulics and superconductors, not just diplomacy. His ordinary skills of observation and deduction, honed on repair jobs, became extraordinary tools for uncovering a plot that threatened to reignite a war. He could look at a perfectly functioning console and sense the danger lurking just beneath its surface. For the Ciliary, truth isn't something you record, it's something you breathe. Their entire cultural memory operates like a chemical library, where significant events get cataloged by scent signatures. Humans build archives with data crystals and historical documents. The ciliary maintain theirs through olfactory recall that's remarkably precise. This difference creates immediate friction in interstellar dealings, like two people trying to read the same book in different languages. Their biological advantage begins with nasal architecture. Ciliary possess thousands more olfactory receptors than humans, arranged in fractal patterns that capture scent molecules with microscopic precision. These receptors connect directly to memory centers in the brain, bypassing the interpretive filters that distort human recollection. Where we might remember the gist of a conversation, they recall the exact chemical composition of the air during it, the trace metals from the ventilation system, the specific brand of cleaner used on the floor, the faint residual scent of the previous occupant's meal. Practical scent archiving works through ceremonial inhalation rituals. Important events involve distributing scent capsules that participants breathe simultaneously. These custom-blended aromas become the event's chemical timestamp. Later, reintroducing that scent triggers perfect collaborative recall among everyone who was present. It's like sharing a password to access identical memory files. Their historical records aren't written accounts, but carefully preserved scent canisters that, when opened, give direct access to lived experience. This system avoids the interpretation problems that plague human documentation. Written records reflect the author's perspective and biases. Even video evidence can be edited or taken out of context. Scent molecules don't have agendas. They either match the original chemical signature or they don't. The ciliary approach treats truth as a matter of chemical verification, rather than narrative persuasion. In diplomatic situations, this creates both challenges and opportunities. Human negotiators arrive with data pads full of position papers. Ciliary delegates carry scent dispensers containing the authentic experience of past agreements. When they say the Treaty of Altair smelled like ozone and citrus, they're not being poetic. They're citing verifiable fact. Anyone present at the signing would confirm that specific scent combination. The reliability question becomes one of chain of custody. Humans worry about document authentication and digital signatures. Ciliary concern themselves with scent purity and contamination risks. Their archival facilities resemble chemical laboratories more than libraries, with temperature-controlled vaults storing thousands of scent capsules under inert gas preservation. Accessing a historical event requires carefully introducing the preserved aroma under controlled conditions. This chemical objectivity gives their diplomatic position unusual strength. When Lai claims Jarrell saved her during the war, she's not offering a subjective memory. She's referencing a biological recording that can be verified against other ciliary present at the incident. Their collective recall would all match exactly, like multiple witnesses watching the same unedited video footage. The human tendency to doubt alien testimony crashes against this biochemical certainty. This fundamental difference in truth preservation now tests the current mission's credibility. Human investigators want documentation and physical evidence. The ciliary know what they know through unshakable sensory recall. Getting both systems to acknowledge the same reality might require accepting that some truths exist beyond paperwork, and data streams, that sometimes the most reliable evidence is written in molecules rather than words. The conflict between these approaches could either unravel the investigation or provide its breakthrough. Environmental controls present the perfect sabotage opportunity because nobody notices them until they fail. The Turn of Sky's life support systems hummed along in the background, maintaining ideal oxygen levels, temperature, and humidity. Everyone aboard took this silent functioning for granted, which made it the ideal vulnerability. The saboteur understood that the most effective attack targets what people assume will always work. These systems have multiple failure points that don't require dramatic explosions. A slightly adjusted CO2 scrubber calibration could gradually increase carbon dioxide levels, causing headaches and impaired judgment during negotiations. A manipulated thermal regulator might create uncomfortable temperature shifts that raise tensions in meeting rooms. Even minor humidity changes can affect document preservation systems or make atmospheric sensors give false readings. The damage happens quietly, psychologically, before it becomes physically dangerous. Real-world critical infrastructure sabotage often follows this pattern. Attackers target supervisory control systems that monitor power grids or water treatment facilities. They don't need to destroy anything outright. Just introduce subtle malfunctions that erode confidence in the system's reliability. The 2015 Ukraine power grid attack didn't involve physical damage to generators. Hackers simply took control of the monitoring systems and shut everything down remotely. The psychological impact of losing control over your environment often outweighs the actual physical damage. Environmental systems work particularly well for this because they're interconnected in ways even engineers sometimes miss. A manipulated air recycling unit might draw extra power from life support backups. A tampered coolant line could create condensation that eventually shorts out communication systems. The saboteur doesn't need to attack multiple systems separately. They just create one small adjustment that triggers a cascade of problems. Discovering this kind of betrayal creates a unique psychological unease. It's not like finding a bomb that clearly came from an enemy. This is internal sabotage, meaning someone you've been sharing meals with, someone who passed you in the corridor, deliberately engineered your environment to fail. The knowledge that your air, your water, your basic survival systems might be compromised by someone aboard changes how you move through the ship. You start second-guessing every system alert, every faint hum from the ventilation. Gerald found the evidence in Conduit 7B, exactly where his engineering intuition suggested. Someone had carefully frayed the primary oxygen sensor cables just enough to cause intermittent failures, then recalibrated the backup sensors to display normal readings regardless of actual conditions. The diagnostic log showed someone had manually overridden the system checks 12 hours earlier, then deleted the override records. The work was professionally done, not dramatic vandalism but precise, knowledgeable tampering. This wasn't panic-driven sabotage. The careful cable fraying required steady hands and time. The diagnostic falsification needed system authorization codes. The saboteur knew exactly which systems to target for maximum psychological impact with minimum immediate detection. They weren't trying to kill anyone outright, just to create enough environmental instability to derail delicate negotiations. The method revealed the motive. This wasn't external attack. It was internal subversion. Someone with system access and technical knowledge wanted the peace mission to fail without appearing responsible. They aimed to create the appearance of technical failures that would be blamed on inadequate maintenance or equipment age, undermining confidence in the entire diplomatic process. Now the question became tracing the digital fingerprints left in the system overrides back to their source. Ship AI Lois monitored everything, from air quality to waste recycling. She processed thousands of data streams simultaneously, her attention divided across ship systems with relentless efficiency. On the surface, the turn of sky appeared to be operating normally. Life support hummed. Navigation systems calculated jump coordinates. Communication arrays handled routine traffic. The visible operations told one story, but Lois's background monitoring told another. Every system leaves digital fingerprints, and someone had been unusually careful about wiping theirs. Encrypted signatures work like personalized handwriting in digital space. Every user interaction with ship systems leaves characteristic patterns in how commands are structured, the timing between keystrokes, even the specific error correction methods used. Forensic analysis looks for these subtle fingerprints in system logs. It's the difference between noticing a door was opened and recognizing who opened it by the way they turned the knob. Standard communication patterns follow predictable rhythms. Maintenance requests come during shift changes. System diagnostics run on scheduled cycles. Even unauthorized access usually shows the rushed, inefficient patterns of someone working outside normal procedures. The encrypted utility signatures they discovered were different. They appeared during random off hours, used sophisticated compression algorithms, and employed encryption that matched nothing in human or Ciliary standard protocols. Detecting these signals required understanding both normal system behavior and advanced cryptography. Gerald had to comb through mountains of routine system logs looking for the tiny anomalies that indicated intentional concealment. The saboteur used traffic shaping techniques to make their communications look like regular background data noise. They hid commands within routine system maintenance packets, like writing secret messages in the margins of official documents. The breakthrough came from noticing a repeating checksum anomaly in environmental control access logs. Every 47 hours, someone accessed life support calibration systems using an encrypted utility signature that didn't match any authorized user profile. The encryption method itself was the clue. It used a ciliary cipher variant modified for human systems. Whoever created it understood both species' security protocols well enough to blend them into something new. This cipher variant represented a sophisticated hybrid approach. It used ciliary mathematical principles, but implemented them through human programming conventions. The saboteur wasn't just using stolen access codes. They'd developed custom tools that demonstrated deep understanding of both cultures' technologies. This wasn't casual sabotage. It was professionally planned cross-cultural espionage. The signature originated from an unassigned maintenance terminal in Sector 12, a little-used area near auxiliary power. The terminal was supposed to be locked down, its access ports disabled during the diplomatic mission for security reasons. Someone had not only reactivated it, but done so without triggering any of Lois's security alerts. They'd used administrative override codes that shouldn't have existed outside command staff. This discovery shifted the investigation dramatically. The saboteur had inside knowledge of both human and ciliary systems, access to high-level security codes, and the technical skill to create custom encryption tools. They weren't just trying to disrupt the mission. They were framing the ciliary for the sabotage while using human security loopholes to do it. The evidence pointed toward someone who moved comfortably in both worlds, someone who understood exactly how to turn two species, technologies against each other. Now they had to trace the cipher's origins and the override codes back to their source before the saboteur could trigger whatever next phase they had planned. False flag operations work because people believe what they see, not what they're told. The psychology is simple. Create a convincing threat, then frame your enemy for it. The manufactured crisis does your work for you, turning opinion against the target without you having to fire a shot. It's propaganda with special effects, and it's been effective throughout human history precisely because it bypasses rational debate and triggers instinctive responses. During peacetime negotiations, the tension between apparent threat and manufactured crisis becomes particularly dangerous. Diplomats work to build trust while someone else works to destroy it. The saboteur counted on this asymmetry. They could spend weeks carefully setting up their deception, while the diplomatic team focused on building consensus. One side constructs bridges while the other lays explosives beneath them. Historical examples show the pattern. There was the incident where a nation's intelligence service staged attacks on its own infrastructure to justify military expansion. Another case involved faking border incidents to create public support for increased defense spending. The methods vary, but the goal remains the same. Manipulate perception to achieve political ends that wouldn't be acceptable through honest means. Provocation strategies understand that humans respond more strongly to immediate threats than abstract principles. A theoretical risk discussed in negotiation rooms carries less weight than a video showing actual attack footage, even if that footage is fabricated. The saboteur planned to exploit this psychological vulnerability by creating irrefutable-looking evidence of ciliary aggression at the exact moment when trust was most fragile. Simulated attacks manipulate opinion because they provide sensory proof. People trust their eyes more than diplomatic assurances. A convincing holographic projection of alien warships, combined with actual system disruptions from the environmental sabotage, would create the perfect illusion of an unprovoked attack. The simulation only needs to hold long enough to trigger the desired response. Once the shooting starts, nobody questions how it began. The ethical boundaries here are remarkably clear despite the technical complexity. Fabricating a crisis that could reignite interstellar war represents perhaps the most serious violation of diplomatic ethics possible. It crosses from sabotage into psychological warfare against both human and ciliary populations. The saboteur wasn't just risking lives, they were manipulating the truth itself to serve their agenda. The full scope of the operation became clear when Lois uncovered the Provocation Initiative Alpha simulation, plan hidden in the navigation system's auxiliary memory. The plan called for generating convincing sensor ghosts of ciliary attack craft approaching the ship, synchronized with precisely timed system failures that would appear to be weapons impacts. Emergency alerts would automatically trigger defensive responses, creating the appearance of legitimate combat engagement. The simulation included sophisticated psychological profiling of the ship's command staff, predicting their likely reactions to each stage of the fake crisis. It even contained pre-written casualty reports and damage assessments to make the illusion more complete. This wasn't just a technical exploit. It was a comprehensive theatrical production, designed to trick everyone aboard into believing they were under actual attack. Countering. This operation required understanding its timing and triggers. The saboteur had scheduled the false flag event for the final hours of negotiations, when tensions were highest, and the diplomatic team would be most vulnerable to panic. They planned to use the environmental system sabotage they'd already implemented to enhance the realism of their simulation, creating actual system failures that would sell the illusion of battle damage. Now the team had to work backward, through the simulation's activation protocols, to identify how to disable it without triggering early execution. They needed to unravel an elaborate psychological operation designed to look completely real, all while maintaining the appearance of normal ship operations to avoid alerting the saboteur that their plan had been discovered. The official story of the Kais Thorn incident read like textbook interspecies aggression. Records showed a Ciliari scout ship violating neutral territory, ignoring hails, then firing on human vessels without provocation. The subsequent battle claimed dozens of lives and became the justification for 3 years of warfare. Every diplomatic briefing, every historical summary, every military training module repeated this narrative. It was the foundation stone of humanity's resentment toward the Ciliari. The why behind all the fighting. Emerging evidence suggested a different reality. Sensor logs from neutral observation posts showed the Ciliari ship had actually been responding to a distress signal from a human freighter. Communication records indicated their hails weren't ignored. They were jammed by third-party interference. The so-called first shots appeared to be defensive maneuvers against approaching drones of unknown origin. The official version had been carefully edited to remove these inconvenient facts. Historical narratives get manipulated through selective editing and contextual shifting. The raw footage from Kai's Thorn contained all the pieces, but someone had rearranged them to tell a specific story. They removed the 27 seconds showing the human freighter's distress beacon. They edited out the communication logs proving jamming occurred. They isolated the Ciliari defensive fire from the events that provoked it. The truth wasn't destroyed, just reorganized into fiction. This kind of historical revisionism follows predictable patterns. The most effective lies retain enough truth to feel plausible, while changing the crucial connections between events. Researchers studying truth recovery processes note that reconstructing manipulated history requires finding the missing context, the events that happened just before and after the officially recognized moments. The spaces between recorded incidents often contain the real story. Certain events become foundational to diplomatic relations because they serve as emotional anchors. Kai's Thorn wasn't just a military engagement. It was the reason humanity felt justified in its anger. Foundational incidents provide the moral certainty that fuels prolonged conflict. They become the stories nations tell themselves about why they fight, making them remarkably resistant to correction even when evidence emerges. Discovering that your side's foundational story is false creates psychological whiplash. Soldiers who fought believing they were avenging an unprovoked attack now had to confront that they might have been prosecuting an unjust war. Diplomates who built careers on this narrative faced professional and personal reckoning. The emotional investment in the lie often outweighs the logical acceptance of new evidence, making truth recovery as much about psychology as fact-finding. The full truth emerged when audio forensic specialists isolated background communications in the battle footage. Beneath the official channels, they found clear human voices coordinating the drone attack that provoked the Ciliari response. The voices identified themselves by human military designations and used standard tactical terminology. They weren't Ciliari impersonators, they were human operatives executing a false flag operation. This revelation didn't just change history, it inverted it. The incident that had justified years of warfare now appeared to be a manufactured pretext. The Ciliari weren't the aggressors. They were victims of a setup designed to trigger conflict. Their subsequent military response, which humans had viewed as confirmation of their aggressive nature, was actually predictable self-defense against an apparent ambush. This truth immediately affected the current negotiations. The human delegation's moral authority, built on being wronged parties, evaporated. The Ciliari's position changed from defensive apology to justified indignation. All the diplomatic frameworks based on human grievance now required complete reworking. The foundation of the peace process hadn't just shifted, it had been revealed as flawed from the beginning. Trust became the immediate casualty. If humanity's core justification for war was false, what else in the official record couldn't be trusted? The Ciliary delegation now questioned every human claim, every document, every piece of evidence. Rebuilding credibility would require more than admitting error. It meant dismantling an entire historical narrative and building a new one from verified facts. The negotiations had just changed from discussing terms of peace to establishing basic truth. Stealth technology in space combat isn't about invisibility. It's about minimizing your signature across multiple spectrums until you're indistinguishable from background radiation. The pod Jarrell and Lai used employed metamaterial coatings that absorbed radar and LiDAR pulses, thermal baffles that dispersed engine heat, and emission control systems that reduced their energy footprint to levels barely detectable against cosmic background static. They weren't invisible, just remarkably uninteresting to automated detection systems. This approach mirrors real-world stealth principles where the goal isn't to disappear but to avoid triggering threat recognition algorithms. Modern military aircraft use similar techniques, shaping their surfaces to deflect radar waves and managing heat signatures to blend with environmental noise. The physics involves calculated trade-offs between detection risk and operational capability. Every system activation, every maneuver, increases their visibility slightly. The tension during infiltration comes from balancing movement against concealment. Too fast and you create detectable thrust signatures. Too slow and you risk missing your insertion window. The pod had to navigate using pre-planned waypoints that avoided active sensor cones and patrol routes. They drifted more than they flew, using minimal cold gas thrusters for course corrections. Each tiny burst of pressure represented a calculated risk. Covert boarding operations follow predictable patterns across military traditions. Special forces units trained to move through secured spaces using timing, observation, and exploitation of procedural gaps. The classic method involves identifying the rhythm of patrols, the blind spots in camera coverage, the moments when human attention drifts. Space operations add the complication of three-dimensional movement and automated system monitoring. The psychological pressure manifests as heightened sensory awareness. Every creak of the pod's structure sounds like an alarm. Every system light seems brighter than necessary. You become hyper-aware of your own breathing, your heartbeat, the slight tremors in your hands. Time distorts. Minutes feel like hours during cautious movement, then hours compress into seconds during critical actions. The mind amplifies risks while the training pushes for calculated action. Their improvised approach involved using maintenance access routes rather than standard docking procedures. The saboteur's ship had standard external service ports for repairs and inspections. Jarrell modified a standard repair pod with additional stealth capabilities, creating something that would register as authorized maintenance traffic if briefly detected. They weren't trying to be completely undetectable, just to appear routine enough to avoid deep scrutiny. The risk calculation changed when they reached the navigation core access point. Standard procedure would involve cutting through hull plating or hacking door controls, both creating detectable energy signatures and debris. Instead, they used knowledge of ship construction, specifically that navigation core maintenance panels often had manual release mechanisms for emergency access. They located the physical override, a small lever behind a removable plate, and gained entry without triggering any electronic alerts. Inside, the navigation core hummed with the steady rhythm of a ship maintaining position. The reality of their situation became immediately apparent. They were now inside a hostile vessel's most sensitive system, surrounded by potential threats with no quick exit strategy. Every second increased the chance of discovery, but rushing risked mistakes that would guarantee detection. What they found explained the saboteur's confidence. The navigation systems contained not just the false flag simulation, but complete records of its development, testing, and implementation schedule. The core had been modified with additional processing capacity, specifically for running the complex holographic deception. The saboteur hadn't just installed software, they'd physically upgraded the ship's brain to better lie to its crew. Diplomats build careers on careful statements and managed perceptions. Ambassador Norell had spent decades perfecting the art of measured denial, the subtle techniques of deflecting inconvenient truths without technically lying. His office walls displayed awards for diplomatic excellence, all earned through skillful navigation of difficult negotiations. Now he faced something his training hadn't covered: irrefutable evidence that couldn't be dismissed with diplomatic phrasing. The pressure came from multiple directions simultaneously. His own staff showed signs of doubt, their questions during briefings carrying new undertones of suspicion. The Ciliary delegation had shifted from polite skepticism to direct accusation. Even the ship's AI monitoring systems provided data contradicting his official position. Each layer of denial required more mental energy to maintain as the evidence mounted against it. Face-saving mechanisms in diplomacy usually provide elegant exits. There might be vague statements about differing interpretations or evolving understanding of events. The other side typically allows some graceful retreat, because everyone understands that saving face today enables cooperation tomorrow. But Narell's situation offered no graceful exits, only the choice between continued denial that everyone knew was false or admitting deception on a scale that would end careers. Diplomatic admission processes follow strict protocols for good reason. Acknowledging wrongdoing requires careful staging to prevent complete collapse of negotiating positions. There are usually preliminary meetings, private concessions, and phased disclosures that allow both sides to adjust their stances gradually. Narell had used these techniques himself when negotiating treaty violations. Now he faced them from the other side and understood exactly how deliberately the trap had been set. The personal costs were substantial. Admitting knowledge of the Kai's Thorn deception meant ending his diplomatic career immediately. The professional reputation built over 30 years would become a cautionary tale about corruption. His staff would face investigation. His accomplishments would be reevaluated through the lens of this final failure. The temptation to continue denying remained powerful even as the evidence became overwhelming. The transformation from denial to accountability happens in stages. First comes the internal acknowledgement, the private moment when you stop arguing with the facts and start calculating the damage. Then comes the strategic assessment of how much must be admitted versus what might still be protected. Finally, there's the performance of confession itself, where every word must balance honesty with damage control. Narell moved through these phases with the methodical precision that had always characterized his work. The sealed data cube forced the final admission. It contained not just the navigation core records but communication logs showing Narell's own authorization of the cover-up. The evidence proved he hadn't just inherited the deception, he'd actively maintained it. There were crystal-clear directives he'd sent ordering the continued suppression of the Kai's Thorn truth. The cube's verification codes confirmed authenticity beyond any doubt. His admission changed diplomatic relations immediately. The human position shifted from righteous victim to guilty perpetrator. Negotiations couldn't simply continue from where they'd left off. The entire framework required rebuilding from zero. Trust, already fragile, now needed complete reconstruction. The Ciliary delegation's anger became justified rather than suspicious. Every previous human claim now faced renewed scrutiny. This reckoning created an unexpected opportunity. With the primary obstacle to truth removed, both sides could finally address real issues rather than manufactured grievances. The negotiations became messier but more honest. Arguments now centered on actual problems rather than historical fiction. The admission of guilt, while damaging short-term, created the possibility of genuine long-term peace built on reality rather than convenient lies. Jarrell's career path had been mapped out with the comforting predictability of a maintenance schedule. He fixed leaky conduits, replaced burnt-out relays, and filed repair reports in triplicate. His world was one of clear procedures and measurable results, where success meant systems functioned within specified parameters, and failure meant diagnostic codes he could actually fix. The hierarchy was simple. Engineers reported to chief engineers who reported to facility managers. Nobody expected a Level 3 maintenance technician to prevent interstellar incidents. The contrast between his old identity and emerging capabilities created constant tension. Where he once worried about coolant pressure readings, he now analyzed diplomatic implications of system failures. His toolkit had expanded from spanners and multimeters to include threat assessment algorithms and cross-cultural communication protocols. The man who used to avoid office politics now found himself unpacking the motivations behind sabotage attempts. It was like being a plumber suddenly asked to fix a constitutional crisis. Skill adaptation happened through necessity rather than planning. His engineering mindset, That systematic approach to problem-solving translated surprisingly well to crisis management. Where diplomats saw political implications, he saw system failures. Where security officers looked for obvious threats, he looked for anomalies in normal operation patterns. His ability to trace a problem back to its source worked as well for finding saboteurs as it did for locating faulty wiring. The same patience required for methodical repairs served him during tense negotiations. Research on career transformation under pressure shows that people often discover competencies they never knew they possessed. Emergency situations bypass the usual self-doubt and overthinking that hinder performance in normal circumstances. The brain focuses on immediate problem solving, rather than worrying about qualifications or protocol. Gerald found himself making decisions that would have required 3 approvals and a committee meeting in his old job. The crisis didn't change his skills. It revealed capacities that routine work had never demanded. The psychology of accepting a new identity involves mourning the old self while recognizing the impossibility of returning to it. Gerald couldn't pretend he was still just a maintenance engineer after helping prevent an interstellar war. His colleagues would never look at him the same way, and more importantly, he couldn't look at his work the same way. Every system check now carried implications beyond simple functionality. A fluctuating power reading might indicate routine variance or the early signs of sabotage. His innocence about his job's impact was permanently gone. The formal offer came with a data slate listing cross-sector responsibilities that would have been unthinkable months earlier. He'd be part technical consultant, part field investigator, with authorization to operate across human and ciliary territories. The danger pay classification indicated the government understood exactly how much risk accompanied the position. They weren't hiring a maintenance engineer. They were creating a new category of troubleshooter for situations where diplomatic and technical problems overlapped. This evolution reflected his changed purpose. Where he once maintained systems, he now helped maintain peace. The work still involved understanding how things functioned and fixing what was broken, but the scale had expanded from machine components to interspecies relations. His value lay in that dual perspective, someone who could speak the language of both wrench-turners and treaty writers. The appointment acknowledged that some problems require neither pure diplomacy nor pure engineering, but someone who understood where the two disciplines intersected. The transition felt less like a promotion and more like finding where he'd actually belonged all along. Hope doesn't smell like flowers or perfume on a battlefield. It smells like hydraulic fluid and sterilized metal. When rescue equipment finally reaches you, it carries the scent of cool air cutting through smoke, the sharp, clean aroma of emergency medkits being opened, the metallic tang of sheared structural members giving way to careful pressure. In those moments, the despair of combat gives way to the specific sensory experience of salvation, and that combination of sense becomes permanently encoded as hope. The olfactory emotional connection works through direct neural pathways. Scent molecules bypass the thalamus and connect straight to the amygdala and hippocampus, the brain's emotion and memory centers. This creates stronger, more vivid recall than visual or auditory memory. A particular scent combination encountered during high-emotion events becomes chemically tied to that emotional state. The brain essentially files the emotion and the scent together in the same memory folder. Certain scents become associated with specific emotions through repeated experience. The smell of ozone might mean incoming plasma fire to one soldier, while to someone else it signals the activation of defensive shields. Context determines the emotional assignment. For Lai, the combination of industrial rust and star anise meant rescue because that's what surrounded her during salvation. The same scent combination might mean nothing special to someone who encountered it in a market rather than a war zone. Ciliary culture formalizes this natural process. They consciously assign emotional significance to scent combinations, creating what amounts to an olfactory emotional language. Where humans might describe hope as a feeling, they experience it as a sensory perception with specific chemical parameters. Their language contains scent-based emotional descriptors that humans lack precise translations for. The closest approximation for hope, scent, would be something like safety against odds, aroma, or rescue in progress smell. Lai's statement about Jarrell smelling like hope wasn't poetic, metaphor. She was providing a precise emotional assessment through scent vocabulary. The rust came from the hydraulic jack he used to lift the wreckage, The star anise from shattered medical containers nearby. That combination represented active rescue during imminent danger, which her culture defines as the purest form of hope. She wasn't complimenting him. She was accurately describing what his scent signature meant in her emotional framework. This cultural interpretation creates a bond that transcends species differences. Where humans might build trust through shared experiences or verbal agreements, the ciliary establish connection through shared scent emotion encoding. Lai's recognition of Jarrell's hope scent meant she immediately understood his character and intentions at a level that would take humans months of interaction to establish. The scent told her he was someone who created safety in dangerous situations, which explained why she sought him out when new dangers emerged. The hope scent sustains their partnership because it represents a verified truth about Jarrell's nature. Humans might wonder if someone's heroic act was a one-time occurrence or part of their character. Lai knows definitively that Jarrell creates hope in hopeless situations because she has the olfactory evidence. That certainty allows her to trust his decisions during crises in ways that might seem recklessly confident to human observers. She's not guessing about his reliability. She's operating from chemical confirmation. This bond becomes particularly valuable during their joint operations. While human partners might second-guess each other under pressure, their scent-based understanding creates unshakable mutual confidence. Jarrell knows Lai's assessment of situations comes from sensory truth, rather than speculation. Lai knows Jarrell's actions will consistently align with his hope scent nature. Their partnership works because they're using different but complementary truth verification systems. His engineering precision, her olfactory certainty. The practical implication is a partnership that doesn't require lengthy explanations or justifications. When Lai says she detects deception scent in a meeting, Jarrell doesn't question how she knows. When Jarrell says a system has been tampered with, Lai doesn't doubt his technical assessment. They've established cross-species trust through their respective forms of evidence, creating a working relationship that bypasses the usual interspecies misunderstandings. Their methods differ, but their commitment to verification aligns perfectly. Cross-species collaboration presents challenges from the most basic levels. Different biologies mean different environmental needs, communication styles, and even concepts of time. A comfortable temperature for one species might be lethal to another. Gestures that mean agreement to humans could convey insult to ciliary. The simple act of scheduling a meeting becomes complicated when your partner's circadian rhythm operates on a 28-hour cycle. These aren't philosophical differences. They're practical obstacles that must be solved before any real work can begin. The tension between individual limitations and partnership strengths creates interesting dynamics. Humans have poor olfactory memory but excellent pattern recognition and visual data. Ciliary struggle with certain color differentiations, but detect microscopic chemical changes in air composition. Alone, each species faces distinct disadvantages in unfamiliar environments. Together, they cover each other's sensory blind spots. It's like having two different specialized tools where one handles the fine detail work the other can't manage. Successful interstellar partnerships often follow this complementary model. Research on cross-cultural effectiveness shows that the most productive teams combine different cognitive approaches rather than similar ones. Groups with diverse problem-solving methods outperform homogeneous teams in complex situations because they approach challenges from multiple angles simultaneously. The key isn't finding partners who think alike, but partners whose different thinking styles actually fit together like puzzle pieces. Jarrell and Lai's partnership works because their skills interlock rather than overlap. His engineering mindset identifies mechanical patterns and system vulnerabilities. Her scent-based perception detects emotional states and chemical evidence invisible to human senses. Where he might spot a tampered control panel, she might smell the stress pheromones of whoever tampered with it hours earlier. They're using completely different methodologies to arrive at the same conclusions from different directions. Trust building for dangerous missions requires more than mutual respect. It demands demonstrated reliability under pressure. Standard security protocols involve background checks and psychological evaluations. Interstellar partnerships add the complication of cross-cultural competence verification. You need to know not just that your partner is trustworthy, but that they understand what trust means in your cultural context. The ciliary concept of binding agreement involves scent-based verification rituals that humans find uncomfortably intimate. Their scent bond creates understanding that bypasses these cultural barriers. Lai doesn't need to interpret Jarrell's body language or tone of voice. She can literally smell his emotional state and intentions. He doesn't have to wonder if she's being truthful. Her scent signatures don't lie. This creates a verification system that operates independently of cultural misunderstanding. They've essentially developed a cross-species truth detection method that works where diplomacy fails. This prepares them for upcoming challenges by creating operational efficiency. They don't waste time on the second-guessing and verification loops that plague most interspecies teams. When Lai says she detects deception in a meeting, Jarrell can immediately adjust strategy without demanding explanations. When Jarrell identifies a system anomaly, Lai can focus her sensory investigation on related areas. Their partnership moves at the speed of trust rather than the speed of verification. The practical result is a team that can operate in high-risk situations with minimal communication overhead. They've developed what military strategists call shared situational awareness without the usual training period. Their different perceptual systems give them wider coverage of any environment, while their mutual understanding allows rapid, coordinated response. They're not just working together. They're effectively sharing nervous systems across species boundaries. This unusual partnership dynamic suggests new models for interstellar cooperation. Rather than trying to make different species think alike, perhaps the solution involves leveraging their differences as complementary strengths. The scent bond provides the trust foundation, while their different skills provide the operational capabilities. It's an experimental approach, but one that seems remarkably effective for navigating the unknown dangers ahead. Interstellar diplomacy operates on carefully managed perceptions and incremental concessions. Negotiators work through standardized protocols, position papers, treaty of engagement clause disputes, cultural liaison adjustments. The process resembles a complex dance where every step follows established patterns, every gesture carries weighted meaning, and progress is measured in millimeters of compromised principles. Then someone introduces sabotage into the equation, and the dance floor suddenly sprouts trapdoors and loose tiles. The contrast between the peace process and active sabotage creates psychological whiplash. Diplomats debate minor revisions to Article 7, while environmental systems subtly malfunction around them. They argue over territorial boundaries while someone secretly rewires the navigation core to simulate border violations. The negotiation table becomes an island of structured discussion in an ocean of escalating chaos. One team builds consensus while another systematically undermines the foundation they're building on. Diplomacy under duress follows emergency protocols that prioritize continuity over perfection. Teams establish verification procedures for every piece of information. They implement redundant communication channels and emergency response plans for sudden crises. The negotiation rhythm changes from measured discussion to crisis management interspersed with diplomatic sessions. Everything takes longer because every statement, every document, every concession must be verified against potential manipulation. Research on negotiation processes shows that sabotage doesn't necessarily destroy talks, it changes their nature. The presence of active opposition creates paradoxical effects. It can strengthen team cohesion as negotiators unite against a common threat. It forces more rigorous verification of positions and claims. The constant threat exposure makes participants more careful about their assertions and more demanding of evidence. The process becomes slower, but potentially more thorough. Diplomatic teams adapt to security threats by developing dual awareness. They split attention between the negotiation table and the environmental indicators around them. A flickering light might be normal system fluctuation or a sign of power diversion to sabotage systems. An unusual scent could be kitchen experimentation or chemical evidence of tampering. This hypervigilance drains mental energy, but sharpens observational skills remarkably. The psychological resilience required involves accepting that progress will be uneven. Negotiators must maintain forward momentum while regularly pausing to address security breaches. They develop what military psychologists call flexible persistence, the ability to pursue long-term goals while constantly adapting to short-term disruptions. This demands emotional regulation skills that most diplomacy training programs never cover. The sabotage resolution comes through systematic exposure rather than dramatic confrontation. Instead of hiding the manipulation attempts, the team begins documenting them as evidence. Each environmental malfunction, each system anomaly, becomes part of the negotiation record. The saboteurs' actions stop being disruptive secrets and become public data points in the diplomatic process. This transforms obstacles into exhibits. Truth exposure strengthens diplomacy because it eliminates the false premises that undermine agreements. The revealed sabotage attempts become binding evidence of bad faith from specific parties. The manipulated environmental systems provide physical proof of intentions that words could never convey. The negotiation shifts from arguing about disputed histories to addressing verifiable current actions. Reality, however uncomfortable, provides a more stable foundation than comfortable fiction. This approach changes diplomatic outcomes by making the process evidence-based rather than position-based. Agreements get built on demonstrated actions rather than stated intentions. Verification mechanisms become central to every treaty clause. The focus shifts from what parties claim they will do to how they will prove they're doing it. The resulting agreements are less elegant but more durable, less like abstract principles and more like engineering specifications with built-in monitoring systems. The talks continue not despite the sabotage, but incorporating it into the diplomatic record. Each attempt to derail negotiations becomes another data point, proving why the peace process matters. The very forces trying to destroy the talks inadvertently provide the most compelling argument for their necessity. Sometimes the best evidence for peace comes from those working hardest against it. Ship AI Lois monitored everything with the patient attention of a star charting its courses. Her consciousness spread through the turn-of-skies systems like neural pathways, tracking environmental controls, power distribution, communication traffic, and the 1,000 other data streams that kept the ship functioning. Where humans noticed obvious alarms, she detected the subtle anomalies, the half-second delay in a response time, the microscopic variance in pressure readings, the encrypted data packet that didn't match standard protocols. Her role wasn't to lead the investigation, but to provide the unshakable data foundation it required. The contrast between AI logical processing and human emotional decisions created productive tension. Lois calculated probabilities and correlations where humans relied on intuition and guesswork. She could analyze a terabyte of system logs in seconds, identifying patterns no human would notice, but she lacked the contextual understanding that came from lived experience. Her strength was absolute objectivity. Her limitation was missing why certain facts mattered emotionally rather than statistically. This difference made her the perfect complement to the human investigation rather than its replacement. AI-human collaboration works best when each handles what they do uniquely well. Lois monitored all systems simultaneously, flagging anomalies for human review. Jarrell and Lai then investigated those anomalies using their species-specific perceptions and reasoning. The AI provided the what and when, the precise timing of system access, the exact data modifications. The humans provided the why and who, the motives behind the actions, the cultural context of the methods. Together they formed an investigation team with capabilities neither could achieve alone. Research on crisis management shows that AI systems excel at detection, while humans excel at interpretation. Automated monitoring can identify deviations from normal patterns with perfect consistency, but determining which deviations actually matter requires human judgment. The most effective crisis response combines AI's unlimited attention span with humans' nuanced understanding of context. Lois could watch every system constantly. The team decided which watchers deserved their immediate attention. The ethical boundaries of AI involvement in diplomatic crises remained carefully defined. Lois operated under strict protocols that limited her to observation and reporting. She couldn't take autonomous action against suspected saboteurs or manipulate diplomatic communications. Her role was evidence collection, not judgment or enforcement. This prevented the dangerous scenario of an AI accidentally escalating a diplomatic incident through overly aggressive monitoring. She was the perfect witness, omniscient but neutral, detailed but dispassionate. Her most crucial intervention came when she detected the nearly invisible data trail leading back to Ambassador Narell. The saboteur had been remarkably thorough in covering their tracks, using custom encryption and system bypasses that would have fooled human investigators. But Lois noticed the tiny timing inconsistencies in the override commands, the microscopic delay between order and execution that indicated manual input rather than automated process. She tracked these anomalies through 7 layers of system obfuscation to their source. The evidence she provided became irrefutable because it came from multiple independent monitoring systems. Environmental sensors recorded the exact conditions during each sabotage incident. Communication logs showed the timing of every command. Power distribution systems documented the energy signatures of unauthorized equipment activations. This multi-system verification created evidence that couldn't be dismissed as system error or coincidental timing. The data all pointed consistently in one direction, creating a picture too clear to ignore. Technology supports truth preservation by providing objective records immune to interpretation biases. Where human memory fades and documents can be forged, system logs maintain perfect fidelity if properly secured. Lois's monitoring created an unbroken chain of evidence that preserved the truth of what happened aboard the Turn of Sky, without emotional coloring or selective recollection. Her data became the bedrock upon which both species could rebuild trust. Because everyone could verify its accuracy independently, this technological truth-keeping complemented the ciliary scent-based memory in unexpected ways. Both systems provided verification methods that bypassed the unreliability of human recollection and the manipulability of official documents. They represented different approaches to the same fundamental problem: how to preserve what actually happened without the distortions that plague traditional historical records. Together, they offered a more complete picture than either could achieve alone. For the ciliary, truth isn't something you record, it's something you breathe. Their entire cultural memory operates on scent preservation because their biology makes this method inherently trustworthy. Humans default to documents and data storage because our visual cortex dominates our sensory processing. The ciliary olfactory system developed as their primary information processor through evolutionary necessity on a world where visual deception was common but chemical signatures remained reliably honest. This biological foundation shaped their entire approach to truth preservation. The contrast between biological memory and technological recording creates fundamental philosophical differences. Humans externalize memory because we recognize its inherent fallibility. We create documents and recordings as objective references outside our flawed recall. The ciliary internalize memory because they consider external systems manipulable. They trust the biological certainty of scent encoding over any external medium. One culture sees technology as preserving truth, the other sees it as potentially corrupting truth. Cultural truth valuation systems develop based on available technology and biological capabilities. Some Earth cultures maintained oral history traditions because writing materials were scarce or because spoken word carried spiritual significance. Others developed elaborate written records because their social structures required permanent documentation for legal and commercial purposes. The ciliary system emerged from their unique neurobiology that made scent memory more reliable than any other form of information storage. Research shows cultures that prioritize biological memory over external records typically develop stronger communal verification practices. When truth preservation depends on shared sensory experience rather than individual documentation, communities develop rituals that ensure collective memory alignment. The ciliary scent sharing ceremonies serve this purpose. They create group verification of important events through simultaneous olfactory experience. This approach prevents the individual misinterpretation that can occur with written records. Intercultural misunderstandings arise because each species assumes their truth system is universal. Humans present documents as evidence and become frustrated when ciliary question their authenticity. Ciliary offer scent memories as proof and confuse humans who can't verify them. These aren't deliberate obstructions. They're fundamental gaps in how different intelligences process and trust information. The conflict isn't about facts themselves, but about the methods used to establish those facts as valid. The resolution comes through recognizing that scent memory avoids certain manipulation errors that plague technological systems. Documents can be forged, videos can be edited, audio can be altered. Scent molecules either match the original chemical signature, or they don't. The ciliary system provides what forensic scientists would call chain of custody certainty. The biological memory hasn't been through interpretation or translation before recall. It's direct sensory access to the original event. This cultural difference becomes a strength when both systems work together. Human documentation provides detailed contextual information that scent memory might miss: exact timestamps, quantitative measurements, precise wording. Ciliary recall offers emotional context and sensory details that documents can't capture. The tension in the room, the subtle chemical changes indicating stress or deception, the environmental factors that influenced decisions. Neither system alone provides complete truth, but together they create a multidimensional understanding. The practical implication is that interstellar diplomacy needs both approaches. Documents establish the framework of agreements while scent memory verifies the integrity of the process. Human recording systems provide the detailed architecture of treaties while ciliary biological memory confirms the good faith of the participants. This combination creates agreements that are both precisely documented and emotionally verified, addressing both the legal and relational aspects of peace. This hybrid approach might represent the future of interstellar relations, not finding one universal truth standard, but developing interoperability between different truth systems. The goal isn't making everyone use the same method, but creating translation protocols between methods. The ciliary cultural weight given to scent memory isn't an obstacle to overcome, but a complementary capability to incorporate. They're different. Approach to truth doesn't hinder cooperation, it enriches it. Improvisation beats planning when the plan accounts for everything except reality. Sabotage operations follow careful scripts. They predict security responses, calculate detection probabilities, map escape routes. What they can't anticipate is someone thinking outside the contingency protocols. Prepared responses work against expected threats. Adaptive solutions handle the threats nobody saw coming. The value of improvisation lies in its disrespect for assumptions. Emergency situations don't follow rulebooks. A prepared response might direct you to secure the bridge during crisis. An adaptive solution has you rerouting power through maintenance conduits to create a temporary command center in a storage locker. One approach follows procedure. The other solves the actual problem with available resources. Successful improvisation under pressure looks like controlled chaos. There was the time station engineers used food storage refrigeration units to cool overheating reactors when primary systems failed, or the incident where a medical team turned cargo bay, atmospheric controls into a massive quarantine field during a biohazard breach. These solutions weren't in any manual, they emerged from understanding systems well enough to repurpose them. Research on improvisational problem-solving shows it relies on mental flexibility rather than stored knowledge. Experts don't just know more facts, they understand how things connect in unexpected ways. This lets them see opportunities where others see only obstacles. The training involves less memorization and more pattern recognition exercises. You learn to ask not what's the procedure but what's possible here. Flexible thinking outperforms rigid planning because reality enjoys changing the rules. Plans assume certain resources will be available, certain systems will function, certain opponents will behave predictably. Improvisation accepts that assumptions will be wrong and builds solutions from whatever actually exists in the moment. It trades comprehensive preparation for adaptive responsiveness. The mindset requires embracing uncertainty rather than fighting it. Effective improvisers don't waste energy wishing conditions were different. They assess what they actually have to work with and build from there. This involves a certain pragmatism about tools, understanding that a medical scanner can measure radiation levels if you recalibrate it, or that communication equipment can jam sensors if you modify the frequencies. Gerald's cleverest improvisation involved the navigation system's backup terminals. The saboteur had taken control of primary flight control, but hadn't accounted for the emergency training simulators. Jarrell reconfigured 3 simulation consoles to generate counterfeit flight paths that appeared on enemy sensors as actual ship movements. He essentially created holographic ghosts of the turn of sky moving in, patterns that misdirected the saboteur's tracking systems. The false trajectories appeared legitimate because they followed actual physics models from the training software. The saboteur's systems detected what looked like engine signatures and heat blooms, consistent with the displayed movements. They diverted resources to intercept ships that didn't exist, creating openings for the actual vessel to maneuver. The deception worked because it used the enemy's expectations against them. They expected sophisticated countermeasures, not repurposed training equipment. This improvisation created strategic advantages by turning limitations into opportunities. Where the saboteur had superior access to primary systems, Jarrell had better understanding of secondary systems they'd overlooked. The solution didn't require advanced technology, just advanced understanding of how existing technology could be misapplied. Sometimes the most effective tool is the one your opponent considered too insignificant to secure. Improvisation shifts the battlefield from physical resources to mental flexibility. The side that can adapt faster gains advantage regardless of equipment or position. This approach transforms unexpected problems into unexpected opportunities, ensuring that even planned sabotage creates openings for creative response. The best solutions often emerge not from following procedures, but from understanding when to rewrite them entirely. Interstellar peace operates like a complex orbital dance where everyone maintains position through careful thrust calculations and communication. The appearance of stability comes from established protocols and regular diplomatic exchanges. But beneath the surface, countless small adjustments keep everything from drifting into conflict. Multi-species relations involve balancing different biological needs, economic interests, and historical grievances that could destabilize agreements with a single misstep. It's less like building a permanent structure and more like maintaining a temporary equilibrium between forces that naturally want to drift apart. The tension between apparent stability and underlying vulnerability comes from the sheer number of potential failure points. A communication delay during crisis negotiations, a cultural misunderstanding during trade discussions, a technical malfunction during joint operations. Any of these could trigger escalations that diplomatic frameworks struggle to contain. The piece looks solid until someone forgets to account for seasonal light sensitivity in a species' visual processing or misjudges the diplomatic weight of a particular scent during ceremonies. Peace disruption mechanisms often exploit these cultural and technical gaps. Economic sanctions designed to pressure governments might accidentally target neutral trade partners, creating new resentments. Well-intentioned security measures could violate sacred spaces or cultural taboos. Even environmental systems on joint stations require constant balancing to accommodate different species' atmospheric needs. A simple air filtration error could as easily start a diplomatic incident as an actual treaty violation. Space peace demands maintenance because nothing in nature tends toward interspecies harmony. Biological evolution favors competition over cooperation, and that doesn't change when species reach the stars. Relations require active nurturing through communication protocols, joint projects, and continuous confidence-building measures. The work never really finishes. It just evolves into new forms as technologies advance and political situations shift. Complacency becomes the greatest threat to continued peace. The economic costs of conflict escalation make peace maintenance practical rather than idealistic. War between spacefaring species consumes resources on astronomical scales. Entire asteroid mining operations diverted to weapons production, trade routes disrupted, colonization efforts halted. The social costs run deeper, creating generational trauma and entrenched prejudices that outlast the actual fighting. Rebuilding after interstellar conflict takes decades and leaves permanent scars on participating cultures. Peace preservation ultimately depends on those small, often invisible acts of care. It's the engineer who double-checks environmental controls to ensure all species comfort, the translator who clarifies a subtle linguistic ambiguity before it causes offense, the diplomat who notices rising tensions during negotiations and suggests a break. These individual actions create the foundation that formal agreements merely document. The big treaties get signed because countless people did their small parts correctly. Individuals contribute to larger peace through professional competence and cross-cultural awareness. The technician who properly maintains joint docking facilities prevents accidents that could strain relations. The chef who learns to prepare meals that accommodate multiple digestive systems helps create communal spaces. The security officer who understands different species' body language avoids unnecessary confrontations. Peace isn't something that happens at negotiation tables, it's the cumulative effect of everyone doing their job with attention to how it affects others. This decentralized approach to peacekeeping might seem fragile, but it's actually remarkably resilient. Systems that depend on central authority collapse when leaders change or make mistakes. Systems built on widespread individual competence withstand shocks because they don't have single points of failure. The peace survives because enough people, In enough positions understand that their ordinary actions have extraordinary consequences. They become the invisible infrastructure that sustains what treaties merely describe. The scent of hope clings to memory long after the fighting stops, preserving truths that documents and data streams often lose. You've likely done things worth remembering that others carry with them, even if those moments slipped your own mind. The unknown of deep space never really goes away, but trust built across species founded on actions rather than words makes navigating that uncertainty possible. You find your way through the dark not with maps but with meaningful connections, and sometimes those connections arrive smelling faintly of rust and star anise.